Share the recording. That'll be up to you. Let's see what happens. Okay. So thank you. So I guess the genesis of this class was I thought this week would be packing and things like that, getting ready for my trip. But the sense was that in the aftermath of the Minyan recommendations, that there was some value in additional learning opportunity and conversation opportunity. And even though I thought through the winter, all of the kind of what I felt was like most of the relevant topics were covered through Shiri my Torah over the winter. Maybe people didn't take them seriously, didn't realize it was for real, or I don't know, or whatever. But I thought maybe is there some other adjacent topic that, like, some sort of relevant topic that I could teach about that would sort of provide some sort of added richness to our communal discussion. Okay, so I thought sort of we talk about the Orthodox and the other, sort of what is the relationship of Orthodox Judaism to other forms of Judaism. We'll look historically, and we'll look also about some like what new possibilities in a post-denominational age. I'll have to explain what that means, what some of those new possibilities might be, and why I think this is a post-denominational age in certain ways. So with that, I'll share the source sheet. I will also share a digital copy in the chat. Once I find it. Here we go. Yeah. The owl. Yeah, I feel like I think if the experience is too good for the people on Zoom, I don't want to disincentivize. I really want people to show. So no offense, but I really, so.
Yeah. Instead of the extra chairs, you want someone to like run and turn off the internet.
Right. No, gotcha. Yeah. That first Zoom Tisha B'Av, we broadcast Eicha over Zoom, and we had not anticipated that we would need extra capacity. Because we had the standard it's like up to 100 or something, and for all the classes and the Zoom Shachri, whatever, we had not even close to that many. And then for Eicha, we had the reader in the empty sanctuary, reading Eicha. It's very dramatic. I was very proud of that idea. But then we had anyway. I think in the middle, somebody was scrambling to pay for the extra capacity. It was big. Anyway, okay, that's all right. So first source. So welcome everyone. First source is Sam Shmuel Hirsch's commentary on Sefer Dvarim. Sam Shmuel Hirsch is one of the kind of founding figures of neo-Orthodoxy or modern Orthodoxy, and in some ways, right, he was a very strong advocate of the belief that to be a pious Jew, you had to appreciate literature and science, and famously, his line was, he would vacation in the Alps, and he would say, when I die, God's going to ask me, so Shimshon knew, what do you think about my Alps? In other words, that you have to appreciate the natural world as part of appreciating God's creation. And this educational system he set up included extensive exposure to German literature. But he also felt that Jewish identity was entirely rooted in common observance of mitzvot. And then his commentary, and he wrote this many places I could have brought that expresses this, but in his commentary to Sefer Dvarim, he writes, every other nation became a nation solely by virtue of the fact that it has a land of its own. Only after that does it create its own laws to be observed in that land. You, by contrast, became a nation solely by virtue of your law and were given a land of your own solely for the purpose that you may observe the law. The law is constant and you and the land are variables, right? To be Jewish is to observe the Torah. And so who do we have bonds with? We have other people who observe the Torah the same way we do. Any other form of national identity, whether it's kin or connection to a land, is secondary, right? I mean, he was writing this in I don't know, the 1860s, 1870s in Germany. This was a time, where nationalism was already beginning, and in Western Europe and Central Europe. So and he rejected that. He thought that's not a model that's not a model for Jews. The model for Jews is that the Torah is our entirety, as what defines us. And therefore, it's not surprising that one of the core beliefs that he had was a concept that he called Austritt, which I'll sort of explain briefly. This was a major defining feature of like a certain segment of European Orthodoxy in the 19th century. They deal, okay, so as these European states are modernizing and Jews are being emancipated, the government sets up these sort of national government. Sorry, you can't see the document. That's strange. Oh, you're right. I apologize. Okay, let me try again. Thanks for saying. There we go. All right, thank you. All right. So this first happened in Hungary. The government set up a national organization of Jewish congregations and communities that would be the interface between the government and the Jews of Hungary. And the money would be collected and taxes and distributed through this organization to fund Jewish communal life. And this would be the interface between emancipated Jews and the Hungarian state. The Orthodox Jews, this national organization, it seemed, was going to fall under the influence and control of a denomination, a form of Judaism known as neologues, who were a little bit more modern than some other Hungarian Jews. I think today they would probably be considered right-wing modern Orthodox, but in Hungary they were considered Reform, basically, and the Orthodox won the right in the Hungarian parliament to secede and separate from the national Jewish organization and have their own entirely Orthodox Jewish organization. This caused a trauma, and you had congregations, communities in Hungary that had been around for 1,000 years, and they had to decide, are they going to join the mainstream Jewish community, or are they going to just join the separatist Orthodox community? And that meant, your synagogue would join one or the other, cemetery, the nursing home, every institution of Jewish life had to vote or find a way to decide which they would join. And people, cemeteries were split, communities were split. There was a group in Hungary that they called themselves the status quo communities. They refused to join either. And they were also actually marginalized by the Orthodox. They were considered non-Orthodox. If you were a shochet who had a job on Rosh Hashanah as a chazan in a status quo synagogue, your meat would not be considered kosher in Orthodox Hungarian life. And that split was never healed until the Holocaust. And that same Central Hirsch started his rabbinic career in Hungary, came to Germany, to Frankfurt, and he imported that doctrine of Austritt to Frankfurt. He felt it was absolutely vital because of this idea, like there is no Jewish identity other than our common observance of the Torah. And if you have a national organization, a Jewish community that isn't defined by that, is led by people who don't share that common commitment to Torah mitzvah, then we have nothing to talk about. We have no Jewish commonality. And so he won that right in the German parliament as well, the Prussian parliament, and every community in Germany had to decide what to do. Most Orthodox Jews in Germany refused to secede, and they remained in the mainstream Jewish community because they wanted to be buried where their parents and grandparents and great-great-great-grandparents were buried in these ancient Jewish cemeteries. And the leading halachic scholar in Germany, the Würzburger Rav, said that you don't have to secede as long as the mainstream Jewish community gives the Orthodox Jews the right to control their own religious affairs and kasher, that there can be kosher nursing homes that are under Orthodox auspices, and they don't interfere in our ritual affairs, and we can run our own synagogues, and we can be members of these mainstream Jewish communities that are not under exclusively Orthodox auspices. And so in Germany, there were two Orthodox Jewish communities. There was the Gemeinde Orthodox, which was the Orthodox Jews were part of that mainstream, they donate to Federation. They're part of the mainstream Jewish community. And there were Austritt Orthodox communities that were separatist and were not involved in the other. They had separate cemeteries. I heard a story from the journalist. I forget. He's Times of Israel or whatever. His grandparents were from this community in Frankfurt, and he said the story. There was a wall in the middle of the Jewish cemetery that divided the two Orthodox portions of the Jewish cemetery in, I think, Frankfurt and Nuremberg, where there were the Gemeinde Orthodox and the separatist Orthodox there was a wall, and I think his grandfather was buried next to that wall, so he knew about it. And there was a Allied bomb that fell during the Second World War and destroyed the wall between the two. So it's like a very, that's how that came to an end. But that dynamic sort of plays out also in Orthodox life post-war as well. Basically, you have the OU affiliated Orthodox community has connections to mainstream Jewish communities, participates in Federation and other sort of these broader non-denominational, non-sectarian Jewish communal offices. And you have the Aguda, which generally doesn't. except for some ways in which they do. And I think sort of another place where this sort of plays out, of course, would be in relationship to Zionism, where the Aguda is founded as a non-Zionist Orthodox organization, but then in the 1930s cooperates with the Zionist movement, and which leads to a more even stronger anti-Zionist Orthodox group, Munkatcher Rab, Satmar, Eda Haredit, etc. But the Aguda sort of accommodates Zionism, and then you have the Mizrahi, which actually joins the Zionist movement officially. And in the American context, you have, let's say, OU Orthodoxy, which participates in federation in certain ways, and you have the Aguda, which generally would not. Yes.
So I don't know that, I guess maybe just to take a step back.
Yeah.
My understanding was that a lot of the opposition to the Gemeinde and this sort of government intervention is that money spoils, right? So like the government is giving money to the community, so then they have a say in what your institutions do, what they teach, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In the United States, like, it's not really the same thing because the government is not really direct. Maybe now.
I think in Germany, the government was funding both. It was just a question of, in other words, I think what the Orthodox won in Germany was the right to be considered as though they were separate religions. So just like everyone's taxes were pooled and then divided based on your religion to fund your religion's affairs. And so if you were in Germany, like you could be Orthodox Jewish or non-Orthodox, and you would still get the same. It's your tax dollars you would get back to fund your religious institutions. That's in England. In England, I think it's a little different. England, the United Synagogue is a nominally Orthodox, big tent, government funded, the government funded official religion. And that government funding does come with strings attached. They have issues like Jewish schools have to accept non-Jewish. Jewish schools can't discriminate in their admissions based on religion because they are funded by the government. So they have to discriminate based on synagogue attendance, right? Because that they can do, right? So we don't discriminate religion, just discriminate based on, like how many aliyahs you laid in shul the week before, so like that. I don't know that they can, so whatever, but it's complicated, right? Yeah, it's complicated, right? It's but America does sorry, what? Hello?
Would you repeat the names of the two groups in German?
Yes, Gemeinde Orthodox means like I think part of the general communal. Thank you. Gemeinde is communal, and Austritt, which means separatist. I think, right? Good. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So you have, again, the founding fathers of modern Orthodoxy are, you have like the Frankfurt School of Modern Orthodoxy, you have the Berlin School of Modern Orthodoxy, very different nuances. You have Gemeinde Orthodox in Germany, you have Austritt Orthodoxy in Germany. American Modern Orthodox really has nothing to do with any of this. Like really, it sort of springs out of Lithuania, the yeshiva world in Lithuania, in the form of, under the influence of Rav Soloveitchik in the 40s and 50s. Obviously, there was modern Orthodoxy before, but he really gives it intellectual heft. And he addresses this question of the relationships of Orthodox Jews and non-Orthodox Jews, really first and primarily in the context, or most famously in the context of religious participation, Zionism, in his essay called Odi Dafek, where he creates this paradigm, what he calls the Brit Goral and the Brit Yeud, that there's the Brit Goral, the covenant of fate, which is signified by our exodus from Egypt, that all Jews are victims of history together. We share a common fate in that the world blows us here and there and pulls us here and there, and we're all together and we have solidarity. And what do you say? If boiling water is poured upon the head of the Jew of Morocco, the fashionably attired Jew in Paris or London has to scream at the top of his voice, as through feeling the pain he will remain faithful to his people. Okay, that's true. We have stated that is the consciousness of the fate imposed upon the people against their will and of their terrible isolation as a source of the people's unity, of their togetherness. It is precisely this consciousness as the source of the people's togetherness that gives rise to the attribute of chesed. Okay, that if you push the button, if you press the door and talk, it will open and they'll hear that it's open. Great, thank you. I doubt it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the covenant of fate. That's suffering through persecution together. And then at Sinai, we accepted a common destiny. That is, he calls the Brit Yeud, and that's when you choose together, and that's based on common ideals and people shared like choice to march together somewhere. So he says, like, ultimately the goal is for the Jews is to advance from having this common fate to a common destiny, from going from the Brit Goral to the Brit Yehud. That is the story of Jewish history, but he says our job, and that's our job as religious Zionists, is the religious Shivat Zion movement is to unify these two covenants, and okay, that's a job. So that paradigm, though, of Brit Goral and Brit Yehud then gets translated not just into the paradigm of how Orthodox Jews should relate to the Zionist movement, it should support the Zionist movement. He also then carries it into the domestic sphere when it comes to interaction with the broader Jewish people also. So here, this is letter 3 from a Yiddish essay he wrote. When we are faced with a problem for Jews and Jewish interests toward the world without, regarding the defense of Jewish rights in the non-Jewish world, then all groups and movements must be united. In this area, there may not be any division because any friction in the Jewish camp may be disastrous for the entire people. In this realm, we must consider the ideal of unity as a political, historical nation, which includes everyone from Mendes France to the old-fashioned Jew of Mea She'arim, without exception. In the crematoria, the ashes of the Hasidim and pious Jews were put together with the ashes of the radicals and the atheists, and we must all fight the enemy who does not differentiate between those who believe in God and those who reject him. That's anything external, okay? Every Jew has to be united. With regard to our problem within, however, our spiritual religious interests such as Jewish education, synagogues, councils of rabbis, whereby unity is expressed through spiritual ideological collectivism. As a Torah community, it is my opinion that Orthodoxy cannot and should not unite with such groups which deny the fundamentals of our Weltanschauung. It is impossible for me to comprehend how Orthodox rabbis who spend their best years in yeshiva and absorb the spirit of the oral law and the traditions from Rabbi Akiva, Maimonides, Rav Moshe Isserlis, the Gaon of Vilna, Rav Chaim Brisker, and other Jewish sages are the pillars upon which their spiritual world rests, can join with spiritual leaders for whom all of this is worthless. A rabbinical organization is not a professional fraternity which fights for the economic interests of the rabbis. It is an ideological entity where members work for one purpose and one ideal. The fundamental difference in ideology and observance makes such unity impossible. Too much harmony and peace can cause confusion of the minds and will erase outwardly the boundaries between Orthodoxy and other movements. Okay, 1950, that was 1954. Okay, so that you see, that's the basic concept of what he called Brit Goral, Brit Yehud, as he writes in Kol Di Dofek vis-a-vis Orthodox participation in the Zionist movement, and he applies that to internal affairs and how Orthodox Jews should or should not participate. So yes, you join federation, yes, you the Jewish Defense Organization should have Orthodox participation, but not interdenominational rabbinical councils, nothing religious. We should, there we really walk our own path by our own light. So reactions to this?
Quick question.
Yeah, questions too. That's also fine. No, questions are great.
Who is he, at that time, who is he talking about, the Orthodox rabbis who spent those years, but for whom, who are the spiritual leaders for whom all this is worth?
I think he's saying
The context.
I think he's saying non-Orthodox rabbis in 1950. I think that's what he's saying.
And who are the Orthodox rabbis who are spending time, like
His students who
his
are,
students.
yeah.
And what did
his
that look
colleagues.
like at that time?
They weren't so impressive in 1954, but they were, but they, look, it was in 1954, American Orthodoxy was primarily, these were refugees from World War II, and my father was in yeshiva in the 50s in New York, and when his teachers were all trained in Europe, and many of them were refugees as he was, and that was American Orthodoxy.
Probably also had a lot of rabbis and Orthodox rabbis and conservative.
Also, Orthodox rabbis were
Yes, I was gonna say.
1954 was the era in which the conservative movement really became dominant in American Judaism.
Right.
The future of Orthodoxy looked very, very weak. He a number of areas really drew hard lines that I think maybe in retrospect we say that enabled like a kind of committed narrow core to survive, and that's the Orthodox community that, like in the American-born Orthodox community, that came from those years. Yeah.
Although I don't know the names of the company, but like I think the real like Talmudic scholars of GPS, like the academic
Rabbi
Talmudic
Halevi.
scholars, had been educated.
Yeah, no, also that's also true. Yeah.
Like, he's
Yes, so right. So I mean that 1954 Saul Lieberman is at the seminary, and yeah,
Right.
and they were related through marriage. They were all yeah.
Yeah, and I think kind of and learn together, right? And then suddenly.
Yeah, and Soliman's wife at that time was the principal at Shulamit, so very. So
It seems harsh for this.
it seems harsh. I
Especially
agree.
when things are so fluid and a little
Yeah,
bit.
the piece-
challenging
yeah.
time.
It seems
Mhm.
to me, and I feel weird saying this about the Rav, but to be short-sighted, he's just about to, or is just founded Maimonides, right? Which I guess everyone says it's Orthodox because it's founded by the Rav, but like, I mean, you just spoke about this, like now we're rounding 70 years of people saying like, but he didn't really mean it, right? Like Orthodoxy doesn't really include coeducation
Mhm.
and I think like he sees himself here as on the right,
Mhm.
right, like right
Vis-a-vis
wing,
this, yeah.
but there's so many I mean, like, I think even the definition of what like you would say is outside persecution versus like to take a radical, like a sort of weird example, like laws that ban what is it called? Like the part of the Brit Milah that is what's it?
Pizza.
Yeah, right? Like I think we would say like good, it protects health, but some would say like, no, you're like everyone should gather together, like you're impinging on our religious freedom. Where's the fight from the left for that?
Yeah.
Um,
So you're saying, okay, so first, okay, so you're saying a couple of different things. And that's great. So just, I would summarize what you said and then see if other people want to say things, and I'll say maybe something of myself, my own. You- there's something risky in condemning others for not being sufficiently religious and traditional and observed, because there's always gonna be somebody on your right who's gonna say that to you. So maybe like just glass houses, or just like we care, okay. And that's just a political, that's like a tactical argument. It's not necessarily because somebody could be right. Like there's somebody out there who's right, that, you know, everyone feels that they're moderate and everyone on one side is radical, the other side they're extremist. But like that might be true of somebody out there, right? And it doesn't the fact that everyone feels that way doesn't mean that everyone's wrong. Somebody might be right about that. It's also true that these categories of outside versus internal are very hard to clearly define. And actually, he gets into trouble with this in a footnote in another essay in the 60s, his response to the Second Vatican Council. He writes an essay called Confrontation, in which he basically calls for Orthodox to like not take part in formal interfaith dialogue. He says, though, when it comes to outside affairs, when it comes to improving the world and joining with, we share a common covenant with all humanity to, you know, like perfect the world and to fight poverty and to deal with the, you know, problems of our neighborhoods, etc. When it comes to like religious things, then we really like we have nothing to do with, and we can't talk to other religions. It's incommensurable. Like one religion can't communicate its own internal experience to another religion. And then he says, but of course, in the footnote, of course, for the religious individual, like everything is actually a religious issue. So he kind of undermines himself in that own essay. And I think to say like what's outside, what's inside, like kind of everything is spiritual, everything is halachic, or nothing. Like it's very hard to have clear lines. I'd also say rabbinic organizations are also organizations that fight for the financial benefit. That's not a wrong thing. That's a value too. And I think where he says, you know, how could these rabbis join with spiritualists for whom all of this is worthless? I think that word worthless is like very, I don't think like that. Like I don't think the rabbis emerging from the non-Orthodox seminaries in the 50s felt that, you know, Rabbi Kiva and Hillel and Chaim Brisker were worthless. Like it's a very, very strong word. It seems more polemical than accurate. And in fact, you know, the Soloveitchik maintained close personal friendships with non-Orthodox rabbis, not only his cousins, but also his neighbors. There was the conservative synagogue in Boston. He was a rabbi there who he was very close with, and I think he felt. I think he got support from him in certain like political fights in Boston, so we have here source 4 is a letter he wrote when he was invited. Oh yeah, yeah, sure.
The phrase here that leaps out at me,
Yeah.
too much peace and harmony.
Yeah,
That sounds almost satirical.
yeah. How did he have too much peace and harmony?
Because he had too much peace.
Here's why. Because in that yeah.
Sorry.
You finish your, but yeah, finish and I'll, yeah.
To say we don't have a long, rich history of dialectic and dialogue and discussion within a, we even call it Talmudic.
Yeah.
It's almost deliberately disingenuous.
Yeah.
It has the ring.
So here's what I would say. I would say 1954, the worshipers at an Orthodox synagogue and a conservative synagogue were very, very similar in the way they did not observe halachic guidelines. Most of them were not Shomer Shabbat. And then into the 60s, most worshipers in Orthodox synagogues were not Shomer Shabbat. They were not day school educated. They were similarly like everyone was basically the same, basically ignorant. Whatever traditionalism they picked up from their immigrant parents or grandparents, that's what sustained their religious affiliation. But it was not Shabbat observance. It was not day school education or any like rich ability to engage in Talmud Torah for most of them. And there was a sense that like they're all kind of the same. Conservatives in there had a lot of Hebrew. So it just seemed like they were kind of the same. It didn't really matter. He felt it did really matter. He felt there were certain principles that were really, really important. And so he felt like let too much peace and harmony means that people don't realize that we're actually different and we have differences that are important. And in time, those differences like enabled Orthodoxy to survive the 20th century, which in 1954 was not an obvious thing. So that's what I would, not that he needs my defense. So you have a letter here, where he declined to, I guess, be like an honored guest at the synagogue dinner, the gala dinner, honoring his neighbor and friend. I cherish my long association with Rabbi Subo, and I consider him a dear and distinguished friend whom I hold in great esteem because of his many talents and fine qualities. It is self-evident that if the dinner were being given only in honor of Rabbi Mr. Shubo, I would consider it a privilege to serve as one of the sponsors. On the other hand, however, this reception, to my regret, will also serve as an occasion to celebrate the completion and dedication of the new temple. Let me say unequivocally that I do recognize the importance of this new house of worship for the Jewish population of Brighton as a means of communal organization and unification, right? In other words, as a like national, quote unquote, as a communal, cohesive, like organizing locus, that's valuable. I also appreciate the unselfish efforts on the part of members and leaders who make such an undertaking possible. Their pride in having attained their goal is fully warranted. You in particular have manifested a strong sense of community awareness and devotion for Jewish causes, for which you should be congratulated. So it's like very positive, but not in like a Torah and mitzvah kind of way. And so he doesn't want to actually like donate to the dinner campaign because it's also about this like scenario that he feels as representing a real alternative vision. So that's his, yeah.
To me,
yeah.
the thing that bothers me about this is the idea of the difference between having to agree with the other people on ideological grounds and accepting the other people's opinions for them, not for you.
Yeah.
Right? So in like the prior comment also like, and I don't know where you come down on where he or we should come down on this, whatever. Like, I mean, like, the way I grew up and learned, like, was always that different people do different things, and you're going to respect how different people do their things, and that might be right for them, but maybe we practice in a different way.
Yeah.
So, like, that's the crux of an issue for me, and
Yeah, that's definitely different. That's definitely that's more in line with I think like how I raise my own children. That that's as well. I think I'd say one possibility is maybe we don't consider the differences to be as significant as he did, and the other because I think everyone's Orthodox about something, right? There's some idea, some ideology out there that you really do feel is harmful, perhaps I imagine, right? And secondly, maybe we feel so generous because we are coming from a place of security and strength, and we feel we have, thank God, vibrant communities, and like and there's room for everyone, and they're not threatening us, and they're not in 1954 the best and brightest of Orthodoxy were going we're going off to JTS for their rabbinical training, and and they thought that was the way of the future. That was intellectually rigorous. That was professionally, that's where you could get the good jobs, etc. Right? So
it comes down to me also the idea of Judaism is not a proselytizing religion, right? So we never, at least the way I understand it, said that Judaism is the correct way that everyone should be living. So the question though to me is is the Orthodox view though that in Judaism?
Yes, it's fascinating. I have to say this is the critique yes. Good. So this is
I don't feel like
yeah.
And that's why all of Europe makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
So to me, it's respecting the other leaders within the other communities.
Good. So this is the great criticism they lobbied at Rabbi Sachs, Ohev Sholom, who is the great advocate, the most eloquent advocate of any recent Jewish leader on the value of interfaith dialogue and religious pluralism, only regarding non-Jewish religions. Within Judaism, he was in a way that I think is not necessary. Somehow he writes that Islam and Christianity and Buddhism are the products of like this like an actual, like way to connect to the divine, or the products of this like human divine encounter, but he can't say that about non-Orthodox Judaism. I think it's a real internal contradiction in his thought, which I think you are picking up on. So people have written on that. Yeah, 1 and 2. Yeah.
In the draft, the draft explicitly. And almost explicitly, they feel the need to draw strong boundaries, even if they're not comfortable with it. Even if like, if Soloveitchik feels like, but we have to have Jewish unity, or even, there's been a lot of talks about the Kilumi movement, the religious Zionist movement of like, we have to have national unity, and that's like a fundamental part of our thinking and our feeling, and we need to maintain boundaries I think in the RabbI's view, to maintain or to keep Orthodoxy alive. Maybe the same, and I can't speak to RabbI Sachs, but that seems to be what comes out of their.
I think so too. RabbI Sachs, so I think he didn't have that. I mean, I think Orthodox, he was active in writing in the 90s and into his death a few years ago. I think Orthodox was very strong. I don't know that the same like sense of under siege, would really explain things. And he was such an advocate of interfaith. So I think there is people have written on this. I think it's an interesting contradiction in his thought. Not that it can't be resolved, but I think it's a contradiction that does exist. Rachel, and then Thera, you want to say?
I'm just gonna say very quickly, like I was in Stern in the 90s, right? So like
Oh yeah.
left by sort of the first generation of teachers after Soloveitchik, and the prohibition, like the amount of time that was spent talking about not going into reform and conservative synagogues was actually remarkable. And to the point where I had a friend from 8th grade, I went to public school, but I'd been in day school before that. And I had a friend from 8th grade who passed away in college. And his funeral was at a conservative shul here in Ireland. And so I was very frum, right? And I was 8 or 20 or whatever. And I called up one of my RabbIim at Stern and I said, what do I do? Like, and he's like, well, the funeral, it's just the reception. And that's not, I mean, he was clearly sort of uncomfortable that I'd even called to ask. But then was like, well, of course you call, and he sort of parsed it to be like, well, it's not a religious ceremony. So, but it was, I think even looking back now, like at that time period, I laugh because it was a real fear, right? I mean, it was a strong fear. And I think they felt a threat from liberal orthodoxy, from open, whatever we're actually seeing blossom now, right? Or begin to blossom more. They were scared of it. Maybe still are.
Yeah.
I think you also have to look though at the attitude of reforming conservative Jews towards Orthodox Jews, especially in the 1960s. Because I had gone to a day school through 9th grade in St. Louis. There was nothing else for girls after 9th grade. I went to public school, and the attitude of other kids, and the school was 90% Jewish, but mostly reform or conservative. Their attitude towards the small group of us who were Orthodox, just like we were from Mars, and they thought that we were old-fashioned and just had. We're living in the past century. So I think it comes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hope, and I think that's the new opportunities in the post-denominational. I definitely want to make sure I speak about how things are very different from non-Orthodox Jews' attitudes to Orthodoxy is dramatically different in the last 30 years, 40 years than it was in the mid 20th century. And I can think of several reasons why and several examples that I felt in my own career in very, very dramatic ways. I want to move beyond Rav Soloveitchik, say something about Rav Kook. I've actually shared this text before. We looked at it, Shabbat HaGadol, one of my favorite texts of Kook. Source 5 is an English summary. And then I have the larger citation from Kook in Hebrew if you want to look at it. Rav Kook, I also say it outside. He writes that there were 3 factions battling for the soul of the Jewish people, for the allegiance of Jews, and he calls them orthodoxy, nationalism, and liberalism. And each one is championing a certain value. Orthodoxy has the flag of the ancient and the holy. Nationalism has the flag of the nation and the collective. And liberalism has the flag of humanity. And Rav Kook says, each of them are true. Each of them are reflecting something true. And the goal is synthesis of all of these. And so I find this incredibly empowering because it enables us to see ourselves in the other and the other in ourselves. And that it's not that we reject it's just that we just have we all have the same 3 ingredients, and it's just a question of what the percentage is. It's just the same 3 ingredients, and is it 30, 30, 30, is it 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, or is it 80% and 10% and 10%. It's just, but everyone is sort of recognizing that these three ideals are facets of a divine truth, and the ultimate goal is not for any one of them at the exclusion of the other to win, but for there to be some correct, authentic synthesis of all of them. Okay, that's I think that opens up a very different way of seeing like other forms of Jewish expression, because it's not that they're not contrary to us, they're just maybe a little bit, I think, it's a little bit too much on the humanism there, right? Or a little, tone down your humanism, a little bit more nationalism, and extra 5% of tradition, and then you'll, and then we'll be identical. But I see that the reason why we're different is not because you're tempted by evil or you're opposing everything I hold dear. It's just that you're just championing humanism a little bit more than I do, and that thing that you're championing and is leading you to a different position than me is something that I myself really value and treasure, just in a slightly different proportion than you. So I find that incredibly helpful. And we see a few other, so a few other sources on like the next generation who are pushing back on Rav Soloveitchik's very clear dichotomy between inside, outside, fate and destiny. Rav Helfgott in source 6 was writing this is like a 50-year looking back at Kol Didofek, and says that maybe we do share more in common with non-Orthodox Jews, right? And upon reflection, though, the formulation strikes me as excessively narrow. Is it really true that we share nothing in common with our secular Zionists or Reform and conservative co-religionists in central areas of religious, spiritual, and moral existence? Even if we differ in cardinal areas, and these should not be minimized, are there not other areas where the differences reflect shared goals but different means? Shared goals, different means, okay? And Rav Lichtenstein, he quotes Rav Lichtenstein, who has said as follows. He says, Orthodox cannot accord secularists or dissenters the hechsher they so incessantly demand. We can, however, place greater emphasis on the factors that, without denying difference, transcend it upon confraternity, upon historical and existential ties, upon essential components of a shared moral and spiritual vision, upon elements of both a common fate and a common destiny. So Lichtenstein in 1986 breaks down that dichotomy in Rav Soloveitchik from 1954, and source 7 is a much longer essay that Rav Lichtenstein wrote, I don't know, like within a few years within a decade of his death, in which he basically says the same, that they're, you say, we can certainly, first of all, he says one thing, first of all, don't think that they're, and he's, this was, again, the 21st century, Orthodoxy is very strong, non-Orthodox forms of Judaism in America are looking weak at that time. He says, don't think that their weaknesses is because we're so great and we've been successful. Their weakness is because of mass assimilation and a general disaster facing the Jewish people. It's nothing to be happy about, and it's a sign of our failure as much as theirs. And if they all, if indeed temple attendance or an affiliation are waning, right? So, and on the assumption that the absentees are beyond the reach of our own messages, they're not beyond competition as much cause for dismay as for gratification, right? And it's not as if they would, they're reaching people we can't reach, they're reaching people we aren't reaching, and their loss is just a loss for us. And then he says, I hope we can affirm without condescension that merit can inhere in the virtue of others, that many of our Reform and conservative brethren sincerely seek the Rebbeinu Shalom, and that their quest has worth. So I think, again, really undermining that dichotomy, and I think that's I think in a very important way. And Rav Hartman, David Hartman here, this is an old essay, but I think much of his thoughts, I think he saw that Zionism represented a framework for Jews of different, who practice Judaism differently, to have like a common project that wasn't just about our fate, about being defending ourselves against the outside world, but actually about creating something special together, like a group project that we could be proud of and representing something creative and new and positive. Okay. The next was I quoted myself. It was a little embarrassing, but this was it was an essay I wrote reviewing some writings of my teacher, Rabbi Clapper, and that actually I'm going to I'll pause for a moment because I think we're going to shift gears now. And I'll pause. Okay, I'm going to say two things. First, I want to say, so part of what is motivating these more softer stances of Lichtenstein and David Hartman, Helfgott, I think it's an awareness Orthodoxy is not under threat anymore, because Orthodoxy is generally thriving, and there has been a change attitude on the part. So where does that change? So I would say non-Orthodox rabbis of my generation and a little bit older than me and certainly younger than me, many of them they've gone to Pardes, they've learned to Drisha, they've gone to Hadar, they have been exposed to Beit Midrash learning, and they see the Beit Midrash and its mode of Torah study as being no less authentic and intellectually valid than the academic context in which Judaism is studied in the non-Orthodox seminaries. And in fact, many of them are jealous of Orthodox rabbinical students who get to study in yeshivot and in Batei Midrash. When I was a Wexner Graduate Fellow, many of my non-Orthodox classmates and fellows were like expressed real jealousy that instead of engaging in academic deconstruction of Talmudic sugyot, I was in a Beit Midrash environment, and which they had all encountered from like various other parts of their life, and so they wish they could continue that in their rabbinic education. So there's a real there's no sense of condescension, no sense that we're benighted, in our the way that which we study, and in fact a real appreciation, respect of our form of Jewish knowledge, and that's the kind of the skills that we have and the textual fluency that we have, the Midrash learning that we cultivate within our community. These are seen as very authentic and sources of respect, not just within our Orthodox community. So in terms of that letter that Rav Soloveitchik wrote in 1954, that all this means nothing to them. No, actually, it means a great deal. And I think they respect us for it and really admire our community for the way that we've cultivated that kind of knowledge and learning and Beit Midrash culture. Please, yeah.
Intellectual piece, there's also the spiritual practice that people have been exposed to and don't look down on people who keep Shabbat or keep Kashrut or whatever,
Sure.
even if they don't do it. So that's a piece of the package.
Yes.
As a compliment to the
Indeed, absolutely. Yeah, and that's you see Reform rabbis who keep kosher, and you see they've all been, in terms of the style of tefillah. I think when Ibn Joshua Heschel was at JTS, he was like this marginalized figure because he was Hasidic, and and now he's their hero because he's Hasidic, and so there's a whole different valence now of what the range of possible modes of Judaism that are seen as authentic and respectable and respected. So I think that also is a difference. And also the mainstream Jewish community supports Orthodox life in ways that wasn't true. Yitzhak Greenberg, when he was a young activist, led a sit-in protest at Federation's annual, the GA, to try to get more funding for Jewish education. And now, in every major city, Federation funds Jewish day schools, and that was not the case in 1954. It is the case now, and we're reaping the benefits of our involvement in the broader Jewish community, and their respect for us has dollars and cents implications on their support of our community. So I think that's all just I think creates just a different context where we don't have to be so defensive, or we don't have to worry that too much peace, because the differences are clear and obvious. We have a community that, again, we have a committed core that is well invested in being Orthodox, and I think we have the respect of our non-Orthodox brothers and sisters that I don't think we have to, I don't the differences are clear by and large, and yeah. So please.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, to me, one of the biggest questions out there is that, at least to me, the differences are not obvious. We say Orthodox, and at least, when I'm talking about my own practice, I talk about halachic observance, but, if I read just this Rav Lichtenstein quote, which is an unfortunate formulation, is legitimizing conservative and other Jews would emasculate the epicenter of Orthodoxy. I don't really know what that means. What does it mean to be, it's not that people haven't written a lot about what it means to be Orthodox, but I think that, we're talking about it a lot.
Yeah.
And it's not
good. So that's our last. So that brings us to our last section, because I think we have now this sort of non-Orthodox halachic practice, which is something really didn't exist, right? I mean, in the 50s, Orthodoxy wasn't halachic in terms of how people live their lives, and now we have people who are not Orthodox by their own proud declaration who are trying to be halachic, and it's not so obvious where the boundary is and why we should care, or what. Yeah.
Well, so the only thing I want to say about that is, I at least in the yeshivas that I went to in Mexico, and it could be that's a very strange experience, but I think there were, especially in the very right-wing part of the Jewish community, the Hasidic community and even in the Yeshivish community, this idea of calling somebody Orthodox. If you're saying you're Orthodox, you're already way to the left. You're basically observant, right? You're, whatever, whatever term.
Okay, to say that's fair. Like if you have to argue about it, it's a sign of some kind of confusion. I think it's fair. Okay, so all right. So what I want to do, however, I want to see if we can sort of formulate some significance of Orthodox beyond just like a tautology. I think and that I think is what I see Rabbi Clapper as the one who sort of tried to do that most effectively, or I think it's somewhat effective, and I think that might be helpful in sort of thinking about our own shul and what it might mean for us. Okay, and so you have like a long tomes on the associate. I'm trying to I'm not but we won't read all of it together right now. He thinks that modern Orthodoxy, like the modern part, is a core belief in human dignity and human freedom and equality, and then the Orthodox part is a commitment to a specific halachic process that is somewhat self-referential, but is still nonetheless coherent. So that the underlying paragraph of a commitment to freedom and human equality is the foundation of the modern components of modern Orthodoxy. Rabbi Clapper grounds our Orthodoxy in a commitment to a halachic process in which poskim and a community of faithfully observant Jews exercise joint responsibility over the shape of halacha. So that's okay. Rabbi Clapper mostly avoids an elaborate discussion of Ikarei Emunah in that book, foundational doctrinal beliefs of Judaism, perhaps recognizing that grappling with faith principles is for many Orthodox Jews secondary to their commitment to Orthodoxy. According to Rabbi Clapper, what distinguishes those who identify as modern Orthodox from non-Orthodox Jews is a willingness to abide by the decisions of poskim, broadly recognized as such by the larger Orthodox community, despite ethical qualms or plausible counter-arguments. So it's like a political commitment. Okay, we're bound, we bind ourselves to others in a kind of political community where we've identified the poskim who are going to decide the halachic questions that we are going to ask. So it's a little self-referential, and so maybe that could be a little meaningless, but I think if insofar as mitzvot are meant to be observed in community, then having some sense of who that community is, I think is necessary.
Super male-centered, right? And I feel like that's like underlining.
Because the poskim are men. Or because
there's a discussion of a masculine, right, and not just the poskim, right, but everybody who made reference as needing to have been respected, is everybody in a position of making decisions are definitionally male.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing.
Yeah,
right?
so I think so. Yeah, so I would say so. He in particular, and I myself as well. I guess I'm committed to maintaining a high standard of whom I want to be offering me halachic guidance and who I think our community should turn to for halachic guidance. I don't want to lessen that standard of excellence and expertise, but I'm also really committed to opening the door to the Beit Midrash to women and continuing that work, which is
I think no woman would ever say the sentence, I'm committed to excellence and learning at halacha, but I'm also committed to an open Beit Midrash in a gender term.
I think many women I know actually have felt that as women, they haven't had Beit Midrash where they can, where they can attain the excellence they feel they need to exercise leadership in the way that they think our community is.
Right there, I mean, they're closing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, and that's okay. And I think Rabbi Clapper also believes in it. Yeah, for sure.
That it's a pity to not.
It's worth it. It's totally. Yes, I agree. Agreed. I also though think that the way power, I think there is something actually. Maybe it hasn't worked. I don't know. You can. It's a convincing argument. You listen to. If not, you can toss it. I think there's something democratic and grassroots about how power operates within Orthodoxy that isn't true in the non-Orthodox denominations. That power does not derive from a position. It's not about being appointed to a committee of law, and it's not about title as a particular title. It's about who other people ask questions to. And if enough people ask you questions that are important enough, then you become a posek. And there's no person who can identify someone as a posek and appoint them as a posek. There's no body that can empower somebody to be a posek. It's really just if people ask somebody questions and they get that reputation and they earn that authority. It's a very grassroots form of authority within a closed universe that we can try to open and we want to open. But there is something, I think that to me, that is the democratic egalitarian potential of halakha that That really is just like, if you trust somebody, ask them your shilas. And if enough people do that, then they'll get that reputation. There's a lot of,
But not according to like what the health, right? Because, I mean, I think that's part and parcel of so many of the conversations we're having are wanting to stay Orthodox, right? And I think people literally scared of like.
yeah, so let's look at,
cousins
good.
not coming to celebrate the name.
Yeah. So let's look at
Right?
source 10. Good. So okay. Let's look at source 10. Okay. Where he writes, women as clergy. Look at that. Okay. So, and he says, so he says so this is just like one paragraph of an essay that you're welcome to read, and I encourage you to read. And he says, however, the question of whether it remains an Orthodox shul, however, is very different. One can be halachic on an ideological island. One cannot meaningfully be Orthodox if the rest of what one recognizes as Orthodox excludes you. It's also possible for such exclusion to eventually have a legislative as well as a sociological impact, and certainly more strident opponents will aim for and claim that impact. Synagogues considering that such innovations must consider the risks and rewards of their choices, as must the opponents of such innovation. So it's a sociological definition, and so you may decide it's meaningless or it's a tautology, but I think that is I think a reality. Okay. The final, and so the final source here is another essay of his where he, Our Partnership Minyanim Orthodox. It's a lengthier essay. Again, recommend reading it. And he says, yeah, obviously it's plausible. The basis of partnership minyan, it's halachically plausible. Rav Henkin said that in the 90s or the 80s. That's clearly true. But the second paragraph, of mine was the existence of an intellectually plausible argument for a halachic position does not ipso facto legitimate that position as an option for practice. If that were so, right, that would, okay. Another premise may be less clear. There's no magic in the word orthodoxy. Practices are not necessarily religiously legitimate just because they are descriptively or prescriptively orthodox. And I can certainly envision scenarios in which practices are religiously legitimate despite being descriptively or particularly non-orthodox. Inclusion within orthodoxy is a sine qua non for halachic legitimacy only so long as orthodoxy remains a faithful conduit of the tradition, and so long as it does not exclude other legitimate conduits of the tradition. Okay, so it's a community that defines itself in certain ways. He thinks it's mostly coterminous with a kind of faithful allegiance to halacha and a halachic process, but it might not be. And there could be things that are, example, I think, like draft deferments for yeshiva students in a war of self-defense is obviously Orthodox, but it's not necessarily halachic, right? That's so. Well, it's contentious. It's contentious. Yeah. So he says, okay, so there is an evident tension between the two premises. If orthodoxy is not by definition the arbiter of halachic legitimacy, on what basis do I delegitimate intellectually plausible positions? The answer to this question is fraught and not necessarily rigorously definable. Okay. To be legitimate, halachic positions must be advanced by authorities and embraced by communities that genuinely relate to halacha as divine law and to the Jewish people as a political community divinely bound by that law. So then he says, so what about with that, how do you view partnership minyanim, which are especially those who worship there, who consider themselves Orthodox? That's an interesting difference. Orthodoxy today is a very strong brand. The worst insult you can call a liberal Orthodox Jew is to say you're not really Orthodox anymore. And I think conservative, for example, is a weak brand. Like the biggest insult you could, call the halachic egalitarian to say you're conservative, really. That's right? Like they're really not, but it's interesting just in terms of that branding piece. So the underlying piece, it should be clear on reflection that perhaps the strongest advocates of the position that conflates orthodoxy with halachic legitimacy are those members of partnership minyanim who are, absent halacha, more comfortable in settings that make no gender distinctions at all. Their willingness to attend partnership minyanim is a stunning rebuke to non-orthodoxy for its failure to provide them with a sociologically or theologically reasonable alternative. At the same time, the people so strongly attached to formal halachic legitimacy are willing to marginalize themselves should obligate the Orthodox establishment to pay close heed. Dan.
Look, so the problem is that he's like, I don't know what terms he used, like descriptive or prescriptive. His whole idea of what, I don't even know, of what is legitimate in terms of the community of halachic observance is either prescriptive or descriptive. I don't really know which. And then based on that, you could just make a whole series of conclusions, right? But it is really self-referential. Right? It's a circular argument.
Because he's already said it's halachic, right? He's already sort of said.
It's halachically plausible. It's halachically plausible.
Yes,
but if But if halacha is going to be that is the weakness, is that it's circular. Granted, that is the weakness. I think he would respond, or I would respond. I think there has to be some system, some way of limiting plausible halachic arguments as a community and saying this is plausible halachic, but we're not going to go there. And I think there are, earlier I said like there are sometimes rabbinic authority can be deployed for like liberal progressive ends, like saying, in this community, whenever a couple divorces, a get is given unconditionally and accepted unconditionally at the beginning of the divorce, that's a deployment of rabbinic authority and you could have the absence of rabbinic authority taken advantage of for very illiberal ends, like the Hilltop Youth breaking Shabbos to Palestinian villages, right? And so I think there is the axis doesn't always go right, left, or I think there's a need for authority that I think somehow we have to get around that circularity.
I mean, to me, I think that's exactly the question, right? Like, if there is let's call it a plausible halachic position.
Yeah.
We follow plausible, even, far more far-fetched halachic positions as a matter of practice as an Orthodox community in all sectors of the Orthodox community. And we just accept them because they're older, right? Or because they're not so politically contentious, or because, they don't, they don't pose a threat. In the spirit of saying, hey, something that is halachically plausible, let's not call it, emasculating our orthodoxy. Let's just bring it in, right? So I think, to me, that's the argument I would give. Like, why would you define a boundary?
Okay, good. So the rest of the essay, that's part of the essay that we didn't read. He says, he gives like a chetzi shir. He says maybe, he offers an analysis of why he thinks it's risky to go in that direction. And you can read the article and you either it's convincing you or not. He says he sort of uses a chetzi shir kind of analysis of either egalitarianism or conservative Judaism, both of which he defines not just labels, but like defines as why, from an Orthodox perspective, the religiously problem. I mean, I think I even kept it here. Maybe I didn't. He says, egalitarian stands for the premise that all gender distinctions in religion are presumptively unjustified, and Orthodoxy understands itself as standing for the premise that God created gender for a reason, other than as a test to overcome, and that religion must account for that difference, although the extent, ways, and context of that accounting are properly the subject of fierce contention. So that's right. Within the last 10 years, but maybe
2014.
2014.
So within the last
few years. Okay. To Orthodoxy conservative Judaism, and I would just say I think he's had some really interesting shiurim and writings in the last, let's say, 2 years, as gender has really, as a concept, has been threatened and questioned in really much broader ways in the modern world. So
What did you say?
He's gone into hot water. I mean.
Double
down on the gender.
That was just a neutral comment.
The Seder. Okay. I'm double down. I wouldn't use that word, but I would say he's like trying to. He's aware that saying 2014 and saying 2024 differently, and and he's trying. Okay. So I think you have to have that argument of why it's plausible, and nonetheless, I don't think, it might not be a good direction or a risky direction, et cetera. I think that is an argument that one has to have. But the fact that something's plausible can't be the end. But I agree that the fact that it's no posek has yet, and like, why have they not, and shouldn't they, and can we lobby them or whatever, or
That's exactly what he said. The posek haven't endorsed them because it's a group of people who are endorsing themselves, right? I mean, that's the argument he makes up front. Up front, we're going to set a group of people who are going to agree. And nobody else come in. Well, then it's not a surprise.
So I don't know if the posek is quite that closed circle, but okay. And so that's the last point he makes at the end, which if you give me 5 to 10 more minutes, we'll wrap up by Mincha time, okay? In the last page, Orthodoxy must make clear that legitimate halachic authority The joint decision procedure includes those who see the modern changes in women's religious role and growth in authority as the chachila and laudable rather than at best b'diavad and tolerable after the fact. I hasten to add that this group certainly includes Rabbi Henkin, and it was a rejection of his authority by the Partnership Minyan movement that was perhaps most problematic at the outset. It must further be clear that legitimate halachic authority includes women with sufficient Torah learning and experience. If we wish to reintegrate the members of this movement into Orthodoxy, we cannot demand unconditional surrender of their values, even if we would want that surrender, which I don't. Rather, we should find ways to ensure that their critique of the ways in which contemporary Orthodoxy enacts gender differentiation is fully heard and discussed. Okay. Partnership Minyanim, in turn, must take concrete steps that anchor themselves to Orthodoxy, especially on issues that are not directly related to their practice. This means, for example, explicitly adopting Orthodox standards for personal status issues, etc. I recognize that this is very difficult for a cutting-edge group to do this, and that it will involve disappointing some members and eventually having some leave in frustration. The alternative I see it is that Partnership Minyanim eventually develop their own authority structure. I don't believe that even the facade of democracy will continue long, that they don't need post-Denominational. Okay, they will hire their own rabbis, align with other institutions, and effectively split off from modern Orthodoxy. This will, in turn, relieve much of the pressure for change within modern Orthodoxy and also likely lead to its end as an independent denomination. I would see this result as undesirable, nor do I think that the new authority structure would long endure. Rather, the slippery slope will, in fact, come rapidly into play. So he sees Partnership Minyanim, if they are fully independent of modern Orthodoxy, modern Orthodoxy kind of fizzles out because that's our most, they're the ones championing one of the defining features of our community. And on their own, they wouldn't have enough like kind of restraint and traditional whatever to pull them back from the slippery slopes into whatever, okay? So we need each other, he thinks, and that requires expanding our understanding of authority to include people who take the critiques of feminism and the insights of feminism very seriously, and includes women as full participants in the Beit Midrash and investment that's necessary to kind of enable that, which we haven't seen yet and doesn't, right? But like, that's a cause that, I mean, he's put his money where his mouth. He changed his, he made his program co-ed, right? That's so he's done that. And so it would be it would be interesting if our little neighborhood could be a place where maybe some of this positive dynamic plays out, where maybe our neighborhood's partnership minyan is like invests in its Orthodox affiliations, where our neighborhoods like Orthodox synagogue invites the critiques of and insights of feminism and sort of celebrates female religious leadership. And then maybe that's a way that we can have like a positive role as this dynamic unfolds. 3 minutes till mincha. Any final questions or comments? Thank you for Thea, and then yeah, go ahead.
Something changes in Orthodoxy. If nothing else, we can look at the attitude for the women studying Talmud.
Yeah.
Right, which was forbidden.
Yeah.
And now it's embraced by many quarters
in
Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
So is there something in there?
Okay. So here, in terms of history gives us all sorts of things that I think it can't necessarily tell us, so opponents of partnership minyanim who support women's Talmud study would say, well, that was endorsed by great poskim, and this hasn't been. So that's different. Whereas advocates would say, so it's all a question of what precedents you feel is most relevant. I would say history tells us that, the Hasidic movement was bitterly opposed, ultimately for nothing. The Reform movement started, I think Rabbi Livnani used to say that if I had been around, I would have rejected Hasidut because they made real halachic changes, and I would have accepted early Reform because their halachic changes were minimal. And everything they did was like totally halachic in the early stages. And like, I would have been wrong about what the actual threat to, or the real revolutionary movement was. So we can't always predict. Bnei Akiva is an interesting example. Bnei Akiva, the Pola Mizrachi, the Mizrachi Workers' Party, split off from Mizrachi and then went off to build the institutions of religious Zionism that made them much more relevant. They took over the Mizrachi. So, right, they had the Moshavim. Like the Mizrachi was like, we don't believe in Aliyah because Zionists didn't believe in Aliyah in the early years. And then Pola Mizrachi was like, no, we're going to go and build Moshavim and Kibbutzim and Bnei Akiva, and then they took over Mizrachi. So like sometimes a splinter group can take over the mainstream. And so history is important, but it can't necessarily, it's predicting the future. Predictions are really hard, especially the future. Yeah.
Reminded by your Edinger, which is like a sociological book on modern Orthodox Israel, but it identifies partnership minyanim, but also 2 other movements which are movements where young Orthodox Jews essentially innovated and did so explicitly in violation of what they were told by the Orthodox rabbinical establishment in Israel. So the Partnership Minyanim is one of those, but the Temple Mount movement is another one. And then the issue of young religious women joining being drafted is another one. And all three of those movements have grown exponentially and have continued. And they did so
fascinating. Totally right. Each one like total rejection of like the mainstream 99% of rabbinic authorities in the 80s and 90s would, great, terrific. Yeah, great, good. Yeah. And then gotta go to Mincha.
A whole other topic, but I come out of this not knowing like who gets to define Orthodox. Like, I think that there's, especially the earlier sources seem to say, like, or a lot of the sources, and including what you said about the marketing, it seems to be it's other people who define.
Yeah,
like,
okay. One last thing. I'll say this. It's really important that I think there's something. Okay. There's something pernicious and I think something very and really unsustainable if our Orthodox identity is all about the shul and not about us. Like that's not sustainable. That was how the conservative movement, the movement is halachic, the rabbi has to do the things, but we don't have to. That's not sustainable. So if we care about Orthodoxy, we have to care about Orthodoxy. And it means that we have to, like, if the shul is the only Orthodox affiliation and doesn't like dictate how we live our lives and the other associations we have, and it's the code that we support or like the educations, whatever it might be, that's ultimately not a sustainable or very positive model. Doesn't mean that I'm not telling any family what they have to do, any person what they have to do. I'm just saying if you care about it, then you have to like think beyond just an identity for the shul. Second of all, I think identity itself can never be more important than content. And I think whenever and sometimes I think that's actually when we're threatened and we're not really sure, then we like put up walls and we care about identity. And I don't know, several people said this is wrong, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I think like for most of the modern Orthodox, I never why. Okay, my wife has a convincing reason why this is wrong. I'm going to say it anyway. So just know that. Put an asterisk to these things I'm wrong. I think Shabbat for most modern Orthodox Jews works pretty well. We have a good sense of what Shabbat is supposed to look like, and so there aren't a lot of polemics within our community about Shabbat. Maybe maybe it's like I'm touching like the swimming pool issue. I don't know, but like in general, we know that hearing aids are okay and microphones in shul are not. We know that the CCTV security camera is okay, but we don't want our kids watching their iPhones on Shabbat. And so somehow we're able to make these decisions with Post-Game or as a community because we have a sense that it's working for us and we know what we want to get to. And that sort of helps us make these decisions. When it comes to gender, I think we don't know what we want. We don't know what it means to be a Jewish man. We don't know what it means to be a Jewish woman. We don't know what it means to be a man or a woman, right? All of these terms are contested. We don't really know what we want. And so therefore, because we don't have that clear sense of content, we then shift the conversation to identity and what it means. And I think that meaning instead, yeah, exactly. Like our instead of like our label as Orthodox, as opposed to like we know what Shabbat want. We know the kind of Shabbat environment we want for our homes and for our children, and so that helps us make these hard decisions, or they're not even hard decisions. 1,000 decisions, we more or less get them right because we know what Shabbat's supposed to look like. We don't know how we want what gender should mean, or what we want it to look like, or how we want it to like live out in our communities, and therefore, instead of having discussions about content, we have discussions about like the label.
To me, in our community, this is an issue of acceptance. And it's not like if you ask the people, you look at the people who go to RoAB, including myself, speak for myself, like there's no discomfort with attending RoAB. There's no question. Most of those people, I think, do not care at all what those customers say about the partnership meetings because the people who go already feel comfortable with it, right? And are in it. So to me, the question for our community to bring this in shul is that question of acceptance of those people in our community. Many people who go to our shul don't consider themselves Orthodox, and they don't. I'm not saying they don't want the shul to be Orthodox. It's a different thing. I'm just saying they don't consider themselves personally Orthodox. But what people like about the shul is that we accept all of those people, right? And so like to me that's why.
But I think the points that come clear here is that part of Orthodoxy being more than just a title is about being attached to a halachic process. And so to the extent that what you're saying is people, some of the people are going, they don't care about the halachic process.
Some don't, but some might, but they then have, they've already decided in their halachic process that they accept partnership.
I think actually, really, I can't speak to your own particular, but I think people who go to partnership minyanim are actually probably more worried about halacha. Because otherwise, why in the world would they
That's what
accept the
it- yeah.
weak sauce?
But
that a
that's what
partnership
they-
is. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that, this does feel like a that's what the one last thing I wanted to say was that, like, I feel like all of the heart rending and like hair tearing out about women's tefillah in the 90s and 2000, 20 years too late.
Yeah,
They were already arguing the wrong question. I worry that that's what we're doing about partnership minyanim, that really Orthodox egalitarian
mhm,
is what our kids
yeah,
are looking at and thinking about, my kids.
yeah, yeah.
And that we are here in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, arguing about something that's 20 years past its prime.
Yeah, I think we gotta, they're waiting for us in the other show, and, hi, here's, okay. Thanks for